One of the strange dynamics with church and the current situation is that the way we're having to operate goes against so much of the way church is supposed to operate and be about. It can't be helped, but that's the way it is, because church isn't about wearing masks and putting up barriers. It's about us being real about who we are in Jesus and breaking barriers down. And church isn't supposed to be a sterile experience. It's about Christian family meeting up to worship God in warmth and friendship. And it isn't about distance. It's about closeness, which is one of the most difficult differences, because although we're now free to gather in a socially distanced way, we're still not really together. Someone in our church captured the situation brilliantly when she summed up the current experience of church as so near and yet so far. And we know that we need to continue to carefully work to the guidelines, maintain a 2-metre social distance to safeguard each other's health as an expression of our love and care towards each other. But at the same time, we also want to do all we can to stay connected. Well, in these different days, we're called to operate in different ways, to be creative, perhaps to come up with alternative ways to maintain our unity, togetherness and fellowship. In Acts chapter 2, we're told that the believers then devoted themselves to the fellowship. Devoted is a very strong word. It carries with it an unshakable commitment of being dedicated to a cause, idea, or an action. And the early church was intentional about that devotion, even in difficult circumstances. Well, God calls us to maintain a spirit of devoted fellowship, even in the difficult circumstances we find ourselves in at present, to continue to be devoted to togetherness, to remaining connected and not becoming disconnected, which is something that could happen if we're not careful or intentional about it, particularly in the months ahead when the weather isn't going to be so great and the nights draw in, when we might be tempted to simply hibernate with a hot water bottle. So let's encourage each other in this area, and where we can, in small groups and the situations that are, of course, legal, that follow government distancing guidelines and the rule of 6, let's take the opportunities we can to be together. Perhaps to meet for a coffee and a bun after a Sunday morning service, or to have lunch together, or to invite someone to join you for a walk, or just to sit and talk over a cuppa. In Romans chapter 12, Paul writes, "Always be eager to practice hospitality." Now, by practice hospitality, he doesn't mean that we have in mind a kind of bake-off situation where you practice your latest experimental creation on an unsuspecting group of friends, a kind of chili chocolate pasta bake or something like that. It's more about putting hospitality into practice. That just as God has opened our hearts, he also wants to open our homes, and for us to express our Christian love in that way. And it doesn't have to be in a big way. We're not called to lay on a 5-course banquet. We're simply called to share what we have and who we are. And as we do, to build fellowship and strengthen friendships. Of course, there are other ways we can develop our togetherness: telephone calls, FaceTime calls, Zoom groups, to see how each other is doing, to see what we might be struggling with, to see what we'd value prayer about. And there'll be a range of other options, of course, that I haven't covered or mentioned. So let's encourage each other to keep on doing these things. And in the words of 1 Thessalonians, to do them more and more, especially while we can. To be intentional about fellowship, committed to friendship, and to be devoted to one another in a way that reflects the way that God is devoted to us.